Dear participants, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. So welcome to the second webinar on SBSTTA 24. And I would like to invite SBSTTA Chair, Ezequiel Benitez, who is chairing all our SBSTTA information webinars, to take the floor. Ezequiel, good morning and take the floor.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Dear colleagues, I hope you are fine and healthy this new year that I hope will be much better than 2020. Many of you attended previous webinars in preparation for SBSTTA 24 and SBI 3 held during last year and also last week. And this Tuesday, just 2 days ago, where we revised agenda item 3 on post-2020 monitoring framework. Today, we will continue with this process with the second SBSTTA 24 information briefing to provide you with more information on pre-session documents for the meeting. As the outset, I would like to invite Ms. Elizabeth Maruma-Rema, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, to provide us with a few remarks. Elizabeth, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benitez, our chair. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all the time zones we're in. It is indeed my pleasure for me to be with you here today and to open officiate this meeting in preparation of the SBSTTA 24, where you will be receiving information on 3 important agenda items that have important economic, social, and environment interests covering the work of the convention and its protocols. To this end, today's discussions on synthetic biology and risk assessments, as well as risk management of living modified organisms, are particularly unique as they provide yet another opportunity to demonstrate our progress in addressing matters of mutual interest under the convention and its protocols in an integrated and coordinated manner as requested by the parties. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the representatives of the ad hoc technical expert groups who have worked on synthetic biology and risk assessments and who will be providing us with the outcomes of their work on these 2 important topics during the intersessional period during this webinar. Barely a week goes by that we do not hear a story on the news about the new publication on synthetic biology. It is becoming more and more apparent that synthetic biology is one of the most exciting developments of recent years, and its deployment in health and environment is of particular relevance both to the convention as well as its protocols. The Conference of the Parties to the Convention have recognized that synthetic biology has the potential benefits, but also adverse effects vis-a-vis the 3 objectives of the convention. And it is expected that during these SBSTTA 24 meeting discussions along these lines will continue. This webinar will also address the agenda item on risk assessment, which has always been a topic that brings intense and interesting discussions under the Cartagena Protocol. These discussions continue to be important as they address the foundation of decision-making under the Cartagena Protocol. Our Conference of the Parties meeting as meeting of the parties has requested SBSTTA 24 to give recommendations on the need for guidance to be developed and on any adjustments to the process for the identification and prioritization of specific issues of risk assessment, which was established by our decision, Cartagena Protocol 9/13. Finally, we will have a brief today on agenda item 6 on marine and coastal biodiversity. We have long understood the importance of the oceans and the life therein, to the health functioning of the planet, and to the social well-being and economic development. And in recent years, we have also witnessed the explosion of attention and action to protect and better manage the ocean, with many referring to 2020 as the super year for the oceans prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. In view of the diversity of users, interests, and priorities for the oceans, work under the CBD on marine and coastal biodiversity has evolved to address a broad range of issues, including ecological or biological significant marine areas, regional ocean governance, capacity building, fisheries and biodiversity, area-based conservation, marine spatial planning, as well as threats such as marine debris and underwater noise, among others. Many of these areas of work will be discussed at SBSTTA 24. Importantly, SBSTTA will consider proposed approaches for the future of the CBD process on ecological and biological significant marine areas and ways to make these significant marine areas process more adaptive and able to better integrate growing knowledge of marine ecosystems. I'm sure that the presentations today will be useful in allowing you all to get familiar with the information that was produced for these items and which have been captured in the documents that were prepared for SBSTTA 24 meeting. I'm sure that with the support of the Secretariat and the guidance of the SBSTTA Chair and SBSTTA Bureau, this webinar will allow you to get familiar with these agenda items, which will be beneficial in terms of preparing you for the upcoming discussions during SBSTTA 24. I wish you all fruitful meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary, for your welcome remarks and for being here with us today. Also, I would like to thank you again for your support in facilitating these webinars and preparing SBSTTA meeting. Let's proceed with the agenda for today. But first, I would like to thank you all participants for joining us today. I trust that this series of webinars will put us in a better position to have a fruitful meeting of SBSTTA 24. Agenda of SBSTTA 24 has 8 substantive agenda items. Last Tuesday, we covered agenda item 3 on scientific and technical analysis and indicators for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Today, as we hear from Elizabeth, we will cover 3 agenda items. The first will address item 4 of SBSTTA 24 provisional agenda on synthetic biology. We will hear from the Secretariat on the key documents for this agenda item and a short report on the outcomes of the ATEC on synthetic biology by the co-chair of the group. The second, item 5 of the provisional agenda on risk assessment and risk management of living modified organisms. Similarly, the Secretariat will present on the documents for this agenda item and a short report of the outcomes of the ad hoc technical expert group on risk assessment by the member of the group. And this great example where SBSTTA provides for scientific and technical advice to protocols. The third, the last agenda item for this day, is item 6 on marine and coastal biodiversity. Also, the Secretariat will provide a presentation on documents prepared to support SBSTTA discussion on this topic. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that this webinar is intended to assist parties and observers in becoming familiar with the documentation for SBSTTA 24, its structure and key elements of content, and to respond to questions from participants on these topics. It is not a negotiation session, and as such, the draft recommendations, which are an element to support SBSTTA deliberation, will be discussed during the formal substance meeting and not at this webinar. The statements and views expressed during the webinars will not be considered part of the official work of substance. After each presentation, we will have dedicated time for you to ask questions. You can ask questions at any time during today's session. To do it, please use the question window located at the right of your screen. When asking a question, again, please include your name and party or organization affiliation in order to help us to better manage the questions. Lastly, I would like to inform you that today's session is being recorded and that it will be made available on the convention's website later in the week, along with the presentations that have been made. With those remarks, I would like to move to the first agenda item for today, agenda item 4 on synthetic biology. The presentation by the Secretariat will be followed by a presentation of the co-chair of the Artix on synthetic biology to share key outcomes of that group. So I hand over to the Secretary for the presentation. I think it's Marianela. You have the floor.
Thank you, Hezekiah. Yes. Thank you very much. Let me just make sure that I project, and we will start right away. Good morning and good day to everyone. I'm going to be presenting on agenda item 4, synthetic biology. And before I move to presenting information on the documents that we have prepared for the 24 meeting of the SBSTTA, I would like to briefly touch on the process that took place during the intersectional period around synthetic biology, because it will be important to understand how the document is structured and where the information is coming from. So very briefly, as you know, decision 1419 is the latest decision on synthetic biology, a topic that is discussed under the Convention on Biological Diversity. So that decision has several requests for the Executive Secretary to carry out some activities during the intersectional period. Some of those activities are, for example, the submissions, online forum, and a meeting of the Artix. And there are more activities that I will describe later on. So what I wanted to explain is that once we carried out those activities, important information was generated. And that information was key for us in developing the documents that you have now available today for the meeting of SBSTTA 24. So in relation to the process, I also wanted to highlight the relationship that exists between these three activities, basically the call for submissions of information, the online forum, and the Artix. It is important to understand that as per decision 1419, the forum and the submissions were key activities that were meant to provide important information for the meeting of the Artix. As such, the first thing we did is that we we called for submissions of information in early 2019, and those submissions were on topics related to the mandate of the Artix. So after that, we immediately produced a document that was a synthesis of the submissions that we received, and that document was made available as an input for the meeting of the Artix, and it is now also available as an information document for SBSTTA 24. Right after, in March 2019, we then hosted the discussions of the online forum. And similarly to what happened with the submissions, the topic of the forum were in line with the mandate of the Artix. So after the forum, with support from the moderators, we produced a report of the online forum that was also shared with the Artix for its meeting. And it's also now been made available as information document for SBSTTA 24. So finally, once those two processes were completed, then we hosted in June 2019 the meeting of the Artix on synthetic biology, and that meeting produced our report, which is of course now also available as an information document for the meeting. So now that I have briefly touched on the process to provide some context, I'll move to provide some information on the different sections of the pre-sessional document. And as you can see there, we have 5 sections on the synthetic biology document and 2 annexes. So the first section, it's a background, and the objective of the background is mainly to create the link with the mandate from decision 1419, and also to articulate and provide some context for the activities that were carried out during the intersessional period, and a brief overview of the sections that are to come in the document later on. Then we have section 2, and section 2, it's an overview of some of the processes that were carried out in the intersessional period, mainly those that as I explained before, were interrelated: the submissions, the online forum, and the ATEC. And you will have there general information on this process, like how were they carried out, when they took place, the moderators, the chairs, where the topics, for example, of the online forum, the topics of the submissions, and so on. But the most important thing is that this section also creates the link for you to make the connection between these different processes and the respective information documents that were produced for each of them, where you will find all the important information that was actually captured from each of those processes. So then, as I've mentioned before, the process for this intersessional period also had other requests to the executive secretary, and some of those requests you can see here. So the idea behind section 3 was to have a section to capture what the secretariat has been doing to address those other requests that we received. So some of those requests goes from updating the technical series on synthetic biology to, capacity building, knowledge sharing, and cooperation, for example. So you will find information about all of those activities and what we did about them under section 3. But I would like to take the opportunity here to also provide some information in relation to the first one, the update of the technical series on synthetic biology. So as you know, when we first made the synthetic biology document available on the SBSTTA website, that was back in May 2020, I think. We have indicated originally that this activity, we couldn't undertake this activity due to a lack of resources. However, the situation has changed recently in the last trimester of 2020. We have now received funds to undertake this activity. And therefore, on December 2020, we have revised the synthetic biology document to include this information and basically to indicate that this is now an ongoing process. So we are currently working on that since November 2020. We are working on the update of the technical series, and we will have the first draft of this update open for peer review before the formal meeting of the SBSTTA. Then, moving to section 4. Section 4 is on considerations for new and emerging issues and the associated criteria. And as you know, SBSTTA has been requested to contribute to the completion of the analysis between synthetic biology and the criteria for new and emerging issues. So we have basically captured under this section elements that could support the deliberations of the SBSTTA on this matter. And some of the elements that you will find there are, for example, the analysis that was carried out by the ATEC in this respect, and where exactly in the annex of the document you can find that analysis. Also, when the ATEC was undertaking that analysis, they identified some challenges in applying the criteria, so information about this is also presented on this section. And also you will find information, for example, on SBSTTA 23 and the submissions received on new and emerging issues, specifically because 2 of those submissions were on synthetic biology. Then the last section of the document is a suggested recommendation, and it is based mainly on elements of decision 1419 and the ATEC report, for example, on issues related to the horizon scanning. And it also contains other elements that are meant to support SBSTTA deliberations towards a draft decision. Finally, the document has 2 annexes, as I mentioned before. So Annex 1 contains the outcomes of the meeting of the ATEC, and basically the outcomes of the meeting, it's a part of the ATEC report that contains the actual technical deliberations of the group. So we have basically taken that from the ATEC report, and we have made that part available as Annex 1 for the processional document. And then we have Annex 2, And Annex 2 provides information on the process for horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment. And I want to let you know that that is also in line with a request that it's what's made to the ATIC on its TORs, on its terms of reference, because the ATIC was requested to recommend options for the process of horizon scanning. Therefore, that information that was produced by the ATIC was captured in Annex 2 to facilitate subset deliberations on the matter as well. So I will conclude by saying that the document is complemented by 4 information documents, as I have explained before. This is the list of the information documents that we have on synthetic biology, and all of them providing very important information on each of those processes that complement what we have on the pre-sessional document. And with that, I will conclude and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marianela, for this briefing. So participants can see the main sections of this document, including the annexes, recommendations, and how it was prepared in attention to corresponding decisions from the COP and the work of the ATIC. Then I would like to invite the co-chair of the ad hoc technical expert group on synthetic biology, Maria de Lourdes Torres, to share the main outputs of the ATIC. Please, you have the floor, Marilena. Adelante.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be this morning here, and I would like to thank the Secretariat for inviting me to share with you the main outcomes of the meeting of the ATEC that, as Marianela already said, it took place in June 2019 in Montreal. And I think it's nice to see how was the ATEC conformed. And as you can see on the slide, the composition of the group was 23 members coming from the parties to the convention. Then there was 1 member from a non-party. Additionally, there were 2 members from organizations representing indigenous people and local communities, and then 9 members from different organizations. Co-chairing this meeting were Kasper Linderstad from Norway, which cannot join us today, and myself, Maria Torres from Ecuador. So before telling you the main outcomes of this meeting, I think it's interesting to remember the Artix Mandate. And this mandate was based on 6 main topics, which are new technological developments in synthetic biology applications that are in early stages of research and development vis-a-vis the 3 objectives of the convention, synthetic biology organisms that may fall outside the definition of living modified organisms as per the Cartagena Protocol, the state of knowledge on the potential environmental impacts of applications of synthetic biology, including those applications that involve organisms containing engineered gene drives, options for regular horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessing of developments, and finally, the relationship between synthetic biology and the criteria set out in decision Roman number 9/29, paragraph 12, related to new and emerging issues. So before sharing with you the main outcomes of our discussions under each topic, I think it's important to consider the following points. The ATEC recognized that the different elements of its mandate were interrelated, some of them, and that there may be some overlap in the discussions on these elements. The ATEC also considered that new technological developments was a broad topic, while synthetic biology applications in early stages of research and development was more concrete. It also noted that the discussions under a number of items could inform consideration of the process for a broad and regular horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment. The ATEC also recognized that the submissions of information and the online forum had provided important and useful information for its deliberations. The ATEC expressed its appreciation for the compilation of the bibliographic references that are compiled in the document that you can see on the slide, which had served as a useful source of information. The ATEC agreed that it will be beneficial if the Secretariat continued to update this document as new research on synthetic biology is published. So let's go to the topics and to the main outcomes under the discussion on these topics. So the first one is new technological developments in synthetic biology. The ATEC under this point recalled the discussions on recent technological developments in the field of synthetic biology during its 2017 meeting and noted that the outcomes of that discussion remain relevant. The ATEC noted that the new technological developments could be grouped into trends that could inform a process for horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment. And these trends you can find in the report that you have available. The second topic was related to synthetic biology applications that are in early stages of research and development vis-à-vis the three objectives of the Convention. Under this topic, the ATEC recognized that synthetic biology applications are at different stages of research and development, and that therefore their relation to the objectives of the convention should not be generalized. The ATEC also recalled that the decision 14/19 recognized that synthetic biology applications could pose challenges to the ability of some countries, especially developing countries, which might lack the necessary capacity to assess the potential impacts. Importantly, the ATEC noted that indigenous peoples and local communities could have different ways of perceiving potential impacts and be impacted differently by the synthetic biology applications in relation to the objectives of the Convention. Again, in the report, you can find a list of synthetic biology applications that are in early stages of research and development and that could be relevant to the three objectives of the Convention. Topic number 3 was related to synthetic biology organisms that may fall outside the definition of living modified organism as per the Cartagena Protocol. The ATEC concluded that most living organisms already developed or currently under research and development through techniques of synthetic biology, including organisms containing engineered gene drives, fell under the definition of LMOs as per the Cartagena Protocol. The ATEC also acknowledged that both virus-like macromolecular assemblies and protocells were not living organisms. Views differ on whether organisms whose genomes had been edited without the use of nucleic acids, using only protein reagents introduced into the cell, like for example, zinc fingers or talent or other applications under this field, will fall under the definition of LMOs. The ATEC considered that it was unclear whether some transiently modified organisms fall within or outside the definition of LMOs. Under topic 4, the current state of knowledge of current and near future applications of synthetic biology, including those applications that involve organisms containing engineered gene drives, the ATEC noted that undertaking a review of the current state of knowledge is a very complex task. The review of the current state of knowledge may provide valuable contribution towards a broad and regular horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment exercise. Considerations of potential benefits and risk is useful, but will not be sufficient. It will also be important to identify knowledge gaps. Again, in the report, you can see that there are challenges that were identified for the identification of potential gaps as a basis for compiling and assessing the state of knowledge. Topic number 5 was options from a regular horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment. And the ATEC recalled that COP agreed that a broad and regular horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment of the most recent technological developments was needed. In this regard, in our discussions, we try to figure out how this process could be performed. And as you can see, we suggest a process with the following steps. First, the first step will be information gathering, followed by a compilation, organization, and synthesis of information. Then it will come an assessment, and finally, the reporting of the outcomes. In our meeting and under this topic, we also identify potential actors and mechanisms for the process, and these suggestions, advices, you could find on the report. Finally, topic number 6 was the discussion related to the relationship between synthetic biology and the criteria set out in decision Roman number 9/29, paragraph 12. I should share with you that this topic brought us to really very enriching conversations and discussions, and you could find these the main points of this discussion in the report. But I would like to highlight the following. The ATEC recognized the challenge in bringing the criteria into context, understanding the criteria, and the lack of guidance as to how they should be applied. The ATEC noted the difficulty in applying the criteria to a broad topic such as synthetic biology. The ATEC also noted that it will be for SBSTTA and the COP to take its advice into account in considering whether synthetic biology should be a new and an emerging issue. And as I told you before, the ATEC deliberations under each criterion are part of the report. And with this, I would like to close my presentation and thank you for your attention.
Muchísimas gracias, María de Lourdes. Thank you very much to the co-chair of the ATEC. So, colleagues, you have all the information on documents related to synthetic biology, including the report of the ATEC. So I will open the floor for questions from participants. So I invite you to make use of the window on questions. I would like to see if Secretariat already have some questions, please.
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we do have our first question. So the question is related to the ATEC reports. So the links of the ATEC reports can be found within the SBSTTA documents as well as on the SBSTTA website, which can be accessed through the main cbd.int website. However, a second part of the question is, what is the criteria for ATEC members or contributors? And to this, I would like to direct it to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Secretariat, please, can you help us to respond to this question?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Basically, the ATEC members are selected based on the modus operandi of the SBSTTA, and you can find information about this on paragraph 5 of the ATEC report, how many nominations we received and how the members were selected. And we select the members taking into account not only their technical expertise, because this is a technical group, but also gender balance and geographical representation in consultation with the SBSTTA Bureau. So I hope this clarifies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Sasha wants to ask. As you know, SBSTTA has its own modus operandi, and there are very clear rules in how to establish any ATEC, considering regional balance, gender balance, specialities, and so on. As it's a usual procedure, and also SBSTTA Bureau participates in giving opinions on the various candidates nominated by parties. It's the usual process established many years ago. Next question, please, Secretariat.
Yes, for sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's a question regarding new and emerging issues, and in particular about transient modification. So I was wondering if I could direct this question towards the SBSTTA Secretary to explain the new and emerging issues from the previous SBSTTA. Thank you.
Thank you. And please, colleagues.
Thank you, Austin. The issue of new and emerging issues, including identification of new topics to be considered as new and emerging issues, was discussed at the last SBSTTA 23. And you can find recommendation from this SBSTTA. SBSTTA did not recommend any new and emerging issues, with one caveat related specifically to synthetic biology, and left it up to the decision of SBSTTA 24. And that's what was presented by my colleague, as well as co-chair of the Artec, on discussions happen at Artec on this issue, and also reflected in the second last section of the press session document on synthetic biology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Participants also should know that there's a procedure for new and emerging issues established since many COPs ago that pass after COP. There's an opening for these nominations, and the SBSTTA make an assessment on this, and as Sasha mentioned, recognize that no emerging issues, and it was one point direct to the ATEC, and we heard the feedback from the ATEC, so this is part of the process of the procedure. Next question, please.
Yes, for sure. So the next question is regarding the coordination between the groups, the ATEC groups. So I would like to ask the Secretariat to explain the coordination between the different ATECs. Thank you.
Secretariat, please.
Thank you very much. So if I understand correctly, then that will be the relationship between the synthetic biology ATEC and the risk assessment ATEC. So I'm assuming that is the question. If that is the case, we have a request from the MOP and also from the COP to have a coordinated approach. So each of the ATECs worked independently. There are different bodies and they work independently, but they consider the issues, that there are common issues that are part of the discussions of risk assessment and synthetic biology. One example is, for example, organisms produce containing engineered gene drives that are LMOs under the Cartagena Protocol, but are also part of the synthetic biology discussions under the convention. So there is a reference, for example, on the reports of the ATEC on synthetic biology that acknowledged that it was the ATEC on risk assessment, for example, the one that was going to make an analysis to decide, not to decide, but to recommend basically whether additional guidance on these kind of organisms were to be developed. So something along those lines was therefore not discussed on the synthetic biology ATEC because they acknowledged that it was going to be discussed, for example, on the risk assessment ATEC. But both groups worked independently apart from those considerations that could have mutual issues. And I hope that clarifies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
The next question is regarding the horizon scanning process. So I would like to ask if the Secretariat could provide a further explanation on this horizon scanning process. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much. Yes, decision 1419, basically on synthetic biology, recognized that horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment of the most recent technological developments on synthetic biology is needed. So based on that, the COP has requested the ATEC on synthetic biology to discuss this topic and to provide options on how this process could be carried out. And those options from the ATEC were to be presented to the SBSTTA meeting, and then SBSTTA will decide how to basically take these considerations into account and what kind of recommendation will be made to COP. So the idea behind the process of regular horizon scanning was to basically keep an eye on the most recent developments from synthetic biology. And if you can see from the ATEC report, you will find there all the options that the group is proposing on how to carry out that process, from actors to the different steps of the process. And basically what it's coming next is basically the discussion during the SBSTTA meeting on how that process could be like and what's going to happen with the process in terms of our recommendation for the COP. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Still more questions, Secretariat?
Yes, there are. Thank you. So the next question is regarding the ATEC deliberations on transient modification of organisms. So I would like to invite the ATEC co-chair to perhaps provide a further discussion of the deliberations of the ATEC. Thank you.
Thank you. Can co-chair take the floor? Maria de Lourdes.
Yes, so the question is related to the transient modified organisms, and which were the discussions on this topic. Is that the question?
Yes, it's about the discussions regarding those. Thank you.
Yeah. So as you may know, it's a complex topic, and our discussions were related on analyzing if a transient modified organisms actually fall under the definition of an LMO. So there were different points, different views under this point, because transient expression of a gene is not in many occasions, this gene is not transmitted, it's not inherited by the next progenies. So that is a technical and scientific discussion to see if, when we are doing experiments with transient expression, this could be considered living modified organisms. So there are different views, members supporting that, of course, that is LMOs, and other members discussing and supporting that they are not living organisms, living modified organisms. So these views, these different views are reflected on the report, and it will be for the SBSTTA again to analyze which decision will be taken to consider these organisms.
Thank you very much, co-chair. I'm wondering if there is maybe the last question, if there's any to continue with next agenda items for today.
At the moment, there are no more questions that I can see. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your participation. I think it's fortunately, it's very dynamic, this session. So let's proceed and move to the next agenda item. I would like to give the floor back to the Secretariat for the overview of documents for agenda item 5 on the risk assessment and risk management of living modified organisms. Secretariat, please take the floor. Watsi, go ahead. You have the floor. We cannot hear you. Watsi.
Good morning. Can you hear me now? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. And I will be presenting agenda item 5 on the SBSTTA agenda, risk assessment in the context of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. And this is an issue which is discussed under the protocol and not under the convention. Okay. Okay. So the process that was undertaken was an extensive process that started in March 2019. There were 4 main elements to the process informed by Decision 913. It recalled the process to consider submissions of information from colleagues and participants, studies that needed to be commissioned. There were 2 studies that were required, on organisms containing genetically engineered gene drives and living modified fish. There was an online forum which took place, and the online forum took place between January and February 2020, where a total of 199 participants registered, 59 participated actively, and 96 interventions were made. Following the online forum, the views were synthesized and put together into a document which is available as an information document for the meeting, and all of these elements were put together and presented to the ad hoc technical experts group that met in April of 2020, and the report of this meeting is also available. The document for SBSTTA has 4 main sections. The background section provides information from the COP decision and provides the outline of the work that has been done during the intersectional period in support of the process established for the identification and prioritization of issues regarding risk assessment of living modified organisms. The background further articulates and provides context for the activities that were done in support of the moderated online forum, as well as the preparations for the ATTEC. It also outlines expectations for the upcoming deliberations during SBSTTA 24 on the need for additional guidance to be developed. Section 2 of the document is more extensive and covers an overview of the processes that have been carried out as per the COP decision. General information on the various processes undertaken, as well as the outputs developed in support of this agenda item, have been incorporated into the information documents. So we have done information on the submissions of information on experiences, challenges, and the needs for further guidance on risk assessment, the commissioning of the studies that were undertaken to inform further processes against the criteria that were set out in the annex to the COP 913 decision, as well as the online forum on risk assessment. Section C of the document then looks at collection and synthesis of relevant information that also facilitated the work of the online forum and the ATTEC. This information included information that was obtained from the 4th national reports regarding risk assessment needs for future purposes. Finally, the report looks at the meeting of the ad hoc technical experts group and the implications of those deliberations. Section 3 of the document is the suggested recommendation. This draft recommendation is based on the elements from the ATTEC meeting and recommending guidelines to be developed for organisms containing engineered gene drives, as well as additional elements that are intended to facilitate the SBSTTA deliberations on this draft decision. The suggested recommendation includes an annex which incorporates suggested terms of reference for an ATTEC to do the work envisaged. Finally, I will summarize all of the documents available to support deliberations on this agenda item. Annex 1 is the outcomes of the meeting of the ATIC. This is the technical outcomes where the deliberations of the ATIC have been articulated. This document is complemented by 7 information documents which cover the elements described. So we have the synthesis of submissions on experiences, challenges, and needs regarding risk assessment of living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives and living modified fish. We have a synthesis of all of the interventions that were made during the moderated, open-ended online forum. We then have 2 studies that were conducted, and both of these study reports that have been conducted are available as the 2 information documents, Information Document 3 and Information Document 4. We have the procedural report of the Ad Hoc Technical Experts Group as Information Document 5, as well as a compilation of relevant bibliographic references on engineered gene drives and living modified fish. And finally, we have information from the reports of from the 4th National Report on the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Watsi, for this explanation. So you can see the different sections of this document, the information document, annexes, and recommendations, but we're going to be keen to look at your opinions during the informal sessions next month. To provide more details, I would like to invite a member of the Ad Hoc Technical Expert Group on Risk Assessment, Marja Ruhonen Leto, to give us a presentation on the key outcomes of this ATEC. Marja, you have the floor.
Yes. Yes, hello everybody. Let me start the presentation. I hope it works like this. Do you already see my presentation?
Not yet. We can see your...
Ah, you can see me.
We can see
That's
you.
of course very important, but let me see, should I? Can you see my screen now?
We can see your desktop, 2 very nice sandals.
Good. Yes. Souvenirs from Nairobi. Okay, let me get started. Is the presentation now in presentation mode?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. These technical challenges are always interesting. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, and hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all colleagues. First, I would like to start, of course, thank the Secretariat for giving me the opportunity to give you a snapshot of the main outcomes of the Artec on risk assessment and risk management. Let me, of course, remind you that all the detailed information you will find in the report. So let's get started. The first thing that I want to tell you about is the Artix Mandate. Let me see if people can see you good. Is the Artix Mandate, and it is, or it was, as follows. The aim was to review the risk assessment studies, and please let me remind you that these were, of course, studies informing the application of the criteria in Annex 1 of Decision 9-13, not studies on risk assessment per se, but information for the analysis according to Annex 1. So this was the first main task of the Artec, and to look at these studies both in connection with LMOs containing engineered gene drives and living modified fish. The second task that the Artec had was to consider the needs and priorities for further guidance and gaps in existing guidance, those identified by parties in response to decision 8-12. Let me see, how do I, that's the way. So two tasks there. The third task was to make a recommendation on the possible need for guidance to be developed, both on LMOs containing engineered gene drives and LM fish, and any adjustments to Annex 1 of the decision 913. And in addition, of course, finally, as always, the Artec is asked to prepare a report on its deliberations, discussions, and on the meeting. I will first touch the first topic, and that was the living modified fish. The Artec agreed that the study was a good basis, and there was plenty of information for us to work on. However, it also identified that more information on potential impacts of LM fish on biodiversity would have been useful to complement the research presented in the study. So some additional information on impacts on biodiversity would have been helpful. And all these points are included as part of the analysis done, and all this you can find in the more detailed report. Then, of course, our task, as I said, was to perform an analysis against the criteria in Annex 1. And let me briefly remind you what those criteria are. Of course, the first criteria, A, is that this need has to be identified by parties. Criteria B, it has to fall under the protocol. C, it has to pose or imply that there are challenges to the existing risk assessment frameworks, guidance, and methodologies. Criteria D, that these challenges that have been identified in addressing the specific issues are clearly described. And then there is still the criteria E, which is divided into four sub-criteria. Adverse effects on biodiversity, may be introduced or have been already introduced to the environment. The third, there's 3I, the small 3 I's, is that it can disseminate across national borders, and that the application is already or likely to be commercialized or in use in the near future. So four sub-points under the adverse effects on biodiversity. So the analysis was performed against these criteria, and the analysis part of the report. As part of the exercise, the Artec recognized that resources related to risk assessment of LM fish do exist, but experts had diverging views on whether these existing documents were sufficient. And in our deliberations, as you can see in the more detailed report, we noted that there were a range of perspectives on the need for the development of guidance. While some experts were of the opinion that guidance would be needed now, some were of the opinion that the guidance could be helpful, but they didn't see any priority for this particular issue. And then some experts were of the opinion that there is no need for further guidance. So this was the first issue that we dealt with, and this was LM fish. Now I move to the living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives. Again, we were of the opinion that the study was a good basis for us to work. However, we were of the opinion that more information on LMOs containing engineered gene drives would have been useful to complement the research presented in the study, and those issues that we thought that we could have more information. You can find those comments in the more detailed study, but let me say a few words. There could have been more information on certain biological issues about the environment and so on and so forth. But please look into the report. Then again, we did the same as we did with fish and the analysis part of the report. And here I would maybe like to highlight that especially under criterion C, frameworks, guidance and methodologies, the Artix were of the opinion that there are technical or methodological challenges. There are issues related to comparative risk assessment framework. There are issues related to monitoring framework, and there is lack of guidance how to deal with uncertainty, and there is lack of validated tools. But again, please have a look at the report. And this is what I partly already said. But our conclusion after our discussions was that there are resources, they are helpful, but it was clear to us that resources currently available are not applicable on a global level. And thus the Artix recommended that guidance for the risk assessment of LMOs containing engineered gene drives should be developed. I hope I'm doing okay time-wise. Our third task, if you look at the two substantives as task 1 and task 2, our third task was the adjustment to Annex, possible adjustments to Annex 1 of Decision 913. We made a few, we noted a few things, but we did not recommend any changes to these criteria. We especially looked at D. First of all, we thought that the criteria from A to D should be understood as mandatory, while criterion E was for consideration. And then we particularly looked at D and C, where C is looking at challenges for risk assessment frameworks, guidance, methodologies, and D is meant to gather information to describe these challenges carefully enough. Then we also noted that criterion E, small Roman 4, was not limited to those LMOs that are already or are likely to be commercialized. Our last task was analysis on needs and priorities for further guidance identified by parties. And here we had quite a lengthy discussion. And according to the decision, we were asked to look at the submissions based on decision 812. But of course, during our discussions, it became clear that there is additional information. We have received earlier information from parties. We have information from online forums. We have information on fourth national reports. And there was clearly diverging views what all information should be taken into consideration, and there were different views on whether some of the topics should be considered under the process for identification and prioritization of specific issues on risk assessment of LMOs. Finally, we took note of the horizon scanning process proposed by the Artix on synthetic biology. I think with this I conclude. I thank you very much for your attention and try to do the technical suggestions that I have been advised to do. Thank you very much. And I think that
Thank you very much, Marja.
now have stopped. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for the report on the outcomes of the ATEC. I would like to thank all the members of the group for their work and contributions to this agenda item. Now we have time to address questions from participants sent to the window box. So Secretariat, please, can you start with the first one?
Yes, just one quick moment, if you don't mind, while I read the question. Thank you. So the first question that we have is a follow-up question to the coordination question between the ATEGs. The question is regarding the topic of engineered gene drives and the work being done under the ATEG of synthetic biology and risk assessment. So could the Secretariat please provide some clarity on coordination between the two ATEGs, please?
Secretariat?
Marianela Ladzi.
I can answer. Yes, basically, as you know, the Artix have specific mandates that come from COP. So even though we try to streamline coordination amongst the two groups, I mean, we cannot go beyond the mandate that each of the group has. So they have a specific task that they need to address during the meetings, and that cannot be changed. But I would like also to emphasize that the coordinated approach between risk assessment and synthetic biology goes beyond the Artix. It is more about the coordinated approach for the Secretariat in the two issues, and that has go also beyond what we have done with the Artix. So as I was explaining before on synthetic biology, the Artix, for example, took note that it was the risk assessment Artix, the one that was going to discuss potential need for guidance on gene drives, which is of course a topic that is discussed under the two topics. And therefore they didn't went into that direction. But there are many other activities that have been taking place beyond the role of the Artix in terms of coordination. So for example, if you go also to the synthetic biology document, for example, you will find an example of a capacity building activity that was hosted for risk assessment, a workshop, for example, where we basically had a case study on gene drives, which was a topic that was of mutual interest. So just to say that the coordination goes beyond the mandate of the Artix. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. I'm wondering if there are more questions.
There's no other further questions on risk assessment at this time.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. I'll give a few seconds to see if any participants want to make another questions.
Mr. Chair, if it's okay, we had a further question on synthetic biology. Would it be okay if I ask that question?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So the further question on synthetic biology was regarding the horizon scanning that was proposed in the draft decision. So the question is asking whether the horizon scanning will also take into account synthetic biology applications in early research and development beyond the trends identified by the ATEG. So if the Secretary could provide more information on that, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Please, Marina.
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, basically, the horizon scanning process has not been established. It will be COP deciding what's going to happen with that process, and therefore everything is open for discussion at this point in time. So it will be SBSTTA basically discussing how that process should look like and could look like, and what kind of elements should be considered as part of the process of horizon scanning in terms of actors, content, you know, all these things. So everything is open for discussion, and I think that is something that will be addressed during the SBSTTA meeting, during the formal meeting of the SBSTTA, and it will be up to parties to recommend to COP what they want from that process. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we should move to the last agenda item for today. I would like to give the floor back to the Secretariat for the overview of documents for agenda item 6 on marine and coastal biodiversity. Joe, please take the floor.
Thank you. I believe everyone should be able to see my screen well now. Yes? Okay, great, fantastic. Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Appiat. I'm the coordinator of the work under the CBD Secretariat on marine, coastal, and island biodiversity. And it's my pleasure today to give you a briefing on the issues that will be addressed under agenda item 6 at SBSTTA, which will be on marine and coastal biodiversity. So first, I wish to just give a overview snapshot of the issues that will be addressed at SBSTTA on marine topics. These include ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, or EBSAs, requests related to the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in marine areas as well as in islands. And also the SBSTTA will be taking note and be provided with information on ongoing work related to the compilation and synthesis of experiences and knowledge on a number of different issues, including coral reefs, noise, marine spatial planning, marine debris, and cold water biodiversity, as well as work on capacity building and regional scale collaboration under the Sustainable Ocean Initiative, and on the linkages between sustainable fisheries and biodiversity. As with all of our work at the Secretariat, it extends from mandates and requests from the Conference of the Parties. So in this regard, we have a number of specific requests from previous meetings of the COP related to the work that we will be then reporting back to the SBSTTA. And I'm noting these requests here. Of course, I should note that these are paraphrased text from the decisions, as if I was listing the entire text, it would go much, much longer. But basically, we have requests from the COP to the Secretariat to identify options for modifying the description of EBSAs, for describing new EBSAs, and for strengthening the scientific credibility and transparency of this process. Previous meetings of the COP have also requested the Secretariat to continue our work on the compilation, synthesis, and sharing of information related to anthropogenic underwater noise, marine spatial planning, marine debris, cold water biodiversity or deep sea biodiversity, and priority actions to achieve Aichi Target 10 for coral reefs and closely associated ecosystems. We were also requested to continue our capacity building activities under the Sustainable Ocean Initiative and to continue our cooperation with FAO and the IUCN Fisheries Expert Group on issues related to Aichi Target 6 and fisheries and biodiversity. All of these topics are captured in our various documents that are being provided for SBSTTA. Of course, the main document there being the official or pre-sessional document, which is SBSTTA 24/6. This contains a progress report on all of these activities, as well as suggested recommendations for the SBSTTA to consider. And of course, these are supplemented and complemented by a number of information documents that you see listed there. What's important to note here is that SBSTTA 24 will not be considering the outcomes of the Northeast Atlantic EBSA workshop, as this was already considered at SBSTTA 23 and will then go directly to COP 15. I also wish to note that these documents and the issues being addressed by SBSTTA do not necessarily cover all areas of work ongoing under the marine program. And importantly, significant amount of work that we do in the marine team to provide substantive input to other processes and engagement and collaboration with other processes, of course, on the basis of COP decisions. Now, first, I wish to turn to our work on ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, or EBSAs. This has been one of the most notable and significant areas of work under the marine program, and began when the Conference of the Parties at its 9th meeting adopted criteria for describing EBSAs. This also then set off a process based on, of course, a request from the COP, for the Secretariat to convene regional workshops all around the world, together with governments and stakeholders and organizations in those regions, to use the EBSA criteria to map out areas meeting those criteria. The outputs of those regional workshops are then submitted to the SBSTA and the COP for consideration, and if those areas then make it through SBSTA and COP, they become official CBD EBSAs, of which we now have more than 320 all around the world. We've had 15 regional workshops since COP10, and thereby covered nearly all areas of the ocean, with the most notable gap being in the Southern Ocean. But unfortunately, despite the successes of the EBSA process, we do have some practical challenges with how it's currently functioning. The EBSA process has generated an enormous number of benefits and not only synthesizing information on EBSAs that is intended to be used by states and competent organizations to inform their planning and management approaches, but also catalyzing important benefits for capacity building and scientific and information sharing. However, the current process does not provide a mechanism to revise EBSA descriptions that have been previously considered by SBSTA and COP. Now, this is a very practical challenge because, as we all know, scientific information, especially in the ocean, is constantly emerging and changing, and we don't have a mechanism to reflect the new information that may emerge about areas that have been already described as EBSAs. And in fact, this actually becomes a very practical challenge also when we're talking about simple mistakes in EBSA descriptions, simple technical, linguistic, or editorial errors. And we presently, unfortunately, don't have a clear mechanism to actually revise EBSAs for these various reasons. We also have, we don't have clarity on how to describe new EBSAs through mechanisms other than or in addition to the CBD regional EBSA workshops, or how to incorporate outputs from national processes. Now, what I mean here is as follows. The regional workshops have covered a large portion of the ocean, more than 75% of the ocean, but there are gaps, of course, major gaps, both in what those workshops themselves covered on gaps in species and systems based on the expertise that was present at the workshops, as well as just gaps where areas were not covered by regional workshops. As well, a number of countries are conducting their own EBSA or EBSA-like exercises and national processes that have not been included in regional workshops. And in fact, we in the Secretariat are regularly receiving submissions from governments who've done their own processes and wish to have that recognition, but we simply can't do anything with these submissions because we don't have a process for how those can be considered or taken up in the EBSA work under the CBD. Now, this has actually been an ongoing area of discussion under the COP for a long time. The previous two COPs, COP 14 and COP 13, actually discussed these issues and were unable to find agreement on these topics. So to try to advance this work and advance these discussions, we convened an expert workshop in February 2020 to identify options for modifying the description of EBSAs and for describing new EBSAs. This was kindly supported by the government of Belgium and Germany and hosted in the beautiful city of Brussels. And what this focused on was actually providing potential modalities or potential processes for what these processes can look like. Basically, based on all of the experience of the EBSA work, how can we put in place processes to revise EBSAs and to describe new EBSAs in consideration of these gaps and challenges that I noted in the previous slide. So the suggested recommendation on EBSAs that are contained in the SBSTA document are directly informed by the expert workshop discussions and very much directly based on the outputs of the expert workshop. And they actually provide proposed modalities to address these practical challenges, proposed processes to actually do these things that we presently can't do. It aims to directly address the concerns and differing perspectives that have been subject to ongoing debates since COP 13. Of course, there could be a number of different ways that these processes could proceed, but as I've said, these issues have been discussed for quite a long time, and over these years, we've begun to better understand the different challenges, concerns, and different perspectives that various parties have on these topics. So we aim to directly address these concerns in the proposed modalities. Now, you may also note that there are a large number of annexes for a SBSTA document, approximately 14 annexes, I believe. And we actually did this purposely. We separated the issues on EBSs into individual annexes to facilitate more organized discussions at the sessions themselves, at the meeting of SBSTTA. The modalities are also delineated with respect to areas within and areas beyond national jurisdiction. Now, of course, the EBSA process is a scientific and technical process, and it is intended to focus on the ecological and biological significance of those areas. And as we know, science, as well as the ecosystems and biodiversity, do not respect jurisdictions, do not recognize jurisdictions. However, governments and stakeholders have different rights in these different jurisdictions that have significant implications for how things like this can move forward. And again, this is reflecting our previous experience in these discussions. So we found it more helpful, and the parties found it more helpful in the actual expert workshop to respect and to recognize the different nature of these different jurisdictions and how that can provide what implications that would have for these modalities. Now we can look at the annexes themselves. There's a lot of them, so I don't need to go into great detail. What we have in the annexes: general considerations for the modification of EBSs and description of new EBSs, repository and information sharing mechanism for EBSs, and basically what implications these new modalities would have for the repository and information sharing mechanism, which I should clarify is actually both of which are currently housed on the EBSA website. Then we have, importantly, the modalities, the proposed modalities themselves. Annexes 3 through 9 focus on the modification of EBSA descriptions. First, the reasons for modification, the proponents for modification, meaning who can propose modification, then processes or proposed processes for modifying the EBSs. And these are separated according to processes of modifying EBSs for editorial reasons, within national jurisdiction, and areas beyond national jurisdiction, straddling multiple national jurisdictions, and then straddling areas both within and beyond national jurisdiction. We also then have annexes related to the description of new EBSs. This includes proponents for the description of EBSs, basically who could propose EBSs, and then processes for the description of new EBSs, within national jurisdiction and areas beyond national jurisdiction, straddling multiple national jurisdictions, and straddling areas within and beyond national jurisdiction. Now, I also should emphasize and remind participants here that these proposed modalities are simply as proposed modalities, which of course are subject to the consideration at SBSTTA, and are based, as I said, on the expert workshop discussions, as well as on our long history of discussions on these topics from previous COPs. But we have a number of other topics that will be addressed at SBSTTA and are contained in the SBSTTA document. This includes future work to implement the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Now, we know, of course, the post-2020 framework is being more directly addressed under other items and of course, in the post-2020 working group. But we did have a very productive thematic workshop on marine and coastal biodiversity in the post-2020 framework in November 2019. And we are also working to support work on marine-related indicators that our colleagues are conducting. On this basis, we are also then requesting a mandate from the SBSTTA to do a more focused analysis, and development of a strategic framework to support implementation of the post-2020 framework in marine areas, as well as in islands. Now, my team coordinates not only the program of work on marine and coastal biodiversity, but also on island biodiversity. And although we didn't have a previous decision from COP14 on island biodiversity, we do feel the need nonetheless for focused analysis and a framework for implementation of the post-2020 framework in islands. We also have, again, the syntheses of knowledge and experiences on marine spatial planning, Aichi Target 10, voluntary specific work plan on biodiversity in cold water areas, marine debris, and anthropogenic underwater noise. Now, these are based, of course, on the synthesis of information that we find in peer-reviewed journal articles, in gray literature, and various sources of information that exist out there, but also, and very importantly, and much more directly, on submissions of experiences from parties themselves and relevant organizations, of course. We also have the topic of fisheries and biodiversity mainstreaming, which is a broader topic and touches on many different areas under the convention. But in our work in the marine program, we have actually been working very closely with FAO, the IUCN Fisheries Expert Group, and a number of other collaborators on issues under the topic of fisheries and biodiversity. including on other effective area-based conservation measures, or OECMs, although we understand that this was addressed in the more in the protected areas discussions from COP14, but nonetheless is an important topic for the fisheries world and the marine world in general. Reporting and assessment on Aichi Target 6 and supporting the assessment of Aichi Target 6, which provided robust input into GBO 5, as well as in facilitating regional scale collaboration. And with respect to regional collaboration in particular, we in the Secretariat, together with UNEP and FAO, coordinate the Sustainable Ocean Initiative global dialogue with regional seas organizations and regional fishery bodies. This is a very important and valuable process that we are continuing, and we will be reporting to the SBSTTA on the progress in this. Finally, we have work under the Sustainable Ocean Initiative on capacity building. Sustainable Ocean Initiative, as many of you may know, is a global capacity building partnership coordinated by the Secretariat. It convenes under SOE. We convene various capacity building activities, including national and regional workshops, as well as training of trainers. But work is now underway to develop the SOE post-2020 action plan to guide SOE activities into the future in supporting implementation of the post-2020 framework. And again, this will just be before SBSTTA for information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for this briefing. As you can see, it's a lot of work on marine biodiversity being done by the Secretariat to different groups, work on EPSAs. You see the document, the many information documents. I was looking at the page of documents for SBSTTA 24. We already have 26 information documents for the different agenda items, and a good number of them are related to marine issues. Also the document with the recommendation and the 14 annexes. Don't panic, they're very small, each one very concrete to facilitate our deliberations during the formal meeting in SBSTTA. With this, I open the floor for questions on this agenda item. So I'll ask Secretariat to start reading the first one, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first question is with regard to the place of EPSAs in the draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Can you speak to that, Joe?
Sure, I'm happy to address that, but the chair and or Sasha may also wish to come in.
Yes.
But
yes.
What's important to note is that the goals and the targets that are contained in the post-2020 framework stand, of course, for various areas of work under the convention, and we in the Secretariat do see EPSAs as playing an important role in achieving those goals and targets. So perhaps I can leave exactly where that fits or how it would fit to either Sasha or Hesikio.
Sasha?
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, so we definitely are talking about the current draft of post-2020 global monitoring framework, and you can see that marine issues are important in a number, if not almost in all targets there. And as Joe mentioned, the continuous work on further identification, description of EPSAs, as well as any steps at national level on any further decisions on management measures, can support a number of those targets, whether we are talking about targets related to sustainability of fishery, whether we are talking about targets related to spatial planning, because spatial planning definitely covers not only terrestrial but marine realm as well, whether we are talking about restoration of ecosystems, whether we are talking about further understanding of nature's contributions to people. So there are many different areas where EPSA work and the future work on EPSA may contribute, but it's not necessarily that there is a specific target for EPSA as such. So EPSA is very much kind of an information, first of all, and also mechanism and tool to support other areas relevant to marine environment. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Exactly, it's been a very long effort to document and to identify important areas. It's up to parties to continue working on different lines of action already there. And of course, not only EPSAs, but the whole marine topic is a relevant component on post-2020. Co-chairs of the Open End Working Group are considering them. As you can see on the draft 0, it appears in many places, and the information from EPSAs is quite relevant for whenever we adopt the framework and the monitoring elements for them in the future. So it's important also to take a look on the recommendations, including these elements on how to update information on EPSAs. Can we move to the next question, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There is a question with regard to the relationship between the marine protected areas target and EPSAs.
I
Yes.
think it's quite related. Please, Joseph, go ahead.
Sure. Well, I don't wish, of course, to then review what was just discussed and rehash what was just mentioned about the post-2020 framework. But what is important to mention here is that EPSAs are not marine protected areas, and EPSAs are not management tools. EPSAs are simply the analysis and the recognition of the ecological and biological features of those areas. They do not prescribe any specific management measures, do not address any specific threats. What they are intended to be is a synthesis of and a clarification and recognition of the significance of that area, which can then inform different types of management tools or conservation tools, or even simply research. Now, this can include protected areas, but can also include and has included things like impact assessment or fisheries management measures, for example. So while EPSAs can be very useful and have informed the designation and management of MPAs, EPSAs are not MPAs, and EPSAs can be used for a wide range of different things. So it's important to keep that distinction between EPSAs and protected areas.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. There is a question with regard to the work on indicators on ocean issues, if some clarification could be provided. Thank you.
Sure, I'm happy to address that. Great. Yes. So as I noted, the work on indicators, of course, is being addressed directly under a different agenda item and was discussed in the previous webinar. However, as there is a significant amount of ongoing work on ocean research, ocean science, and monitoring and reporting, and in recognition of the fact that this coming decade is actually, and starting this year, is the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, we have been working closely to support the deliberations and support the work under the other area under the other agenda item and under the other areas of work under our colleagues to actually supplement and support their work with respect to the ocean. We acknowledge that the ocean is a very complex place. There's a lot of work that's ongoing. So we actually have been working with experts in the Global Ocean Observing System and others in IOC UNESCO, and as well as we actually had a recent discussion with colleagues from the indigenous peoples and local community groups with respect to monitoring and reporting from IPLC. So basically our work is to provide, we're working to provide some advice to those, to the documents and deliberations that are happening in the other agenda item, but it will not be directly addressed under the marine item at SBSTA.
Thank you, Joseph. Next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. There's a question with regard to the issue of invasive species in the marine program of work.
Sure. Yes, I see that as more of a comment, but I think it is important to note that of course, that invasive species is a very important topic, but it is not only an issue that is relevant and important in the marine realm. In that respect, we do have a separate program of work on directly dealing with invasive alien species, including in marine areas. So perhaps sometimes the absence of the mention of invasive species in the marine documents may give the impression that we're not considering those issues, but that is in fact not the case. It is addressed very directly by its own dedicated program of work. We do have some areas of linkages between our respective activities when it's relevant, which we're always open to advice on how we can better do that. But it is something that is nonetheless addressed directly under the CBD Secretariat under a dedicated program of work. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, just to add, as Joe said, that we have a special dedicated program for invasive alien species. And of course, as you know, both the IPBES global assessments, but also the recent GBO5, they both identified and clearly articulated invasive alien species among the major direct threat to biodiversity. And again, definitely for both for terrestrial and marine realms. So again, it's covered in our work, but we definitely in the future can bring to the attention of parties that while they're discussing marine biodiversity, they may wish to probably highlight the issue of invasives in marine realm in a different way, and that will provide for us a platform maybe to distinguish in a more specific way. But again, otherwise, that's all covered by the invasive alien species program under the convention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think what is important to bear in mind is the information on EPSAs is very important and can act through many areas. And of course, any information on invasive species on these areas will be relevant for the specific actions of the Convention on Invasive Species. And we move to next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. The next question concerns the participation of Indigenous peoples. Question is asking whether data show that Indigenous peoples' participation increases or decreases biodiversity protection when IPLCs are included at all stages of initiatives such as SOI. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Yes, we know very clearly, and we have a enormous amount of evidence that indeed robust engagement of IPLCs at the outset and at all stages of conservation and sustainable use is a major success factor in the protection and sustainable use of biodiversity, including in ocean and coastal areas. As such, in the marine program, we do engage and we seek to engage IPLC experts and colleagues in our various areas of work, including in the Sustainable Ocean Initiative. At nearly all Sustainable Ocean Initiative activities, in fact, I can certainly say perhaps all Sustainable Ocean Initiative activities, we do have IPLC representatives present and IPLC experts engaged, and also aim to address their role in implementation. And in particular, we also actually are doing this in different ways with the EBSA work as well. In fact, we have previous training materials related to using traditional knowledge to describe EBSAs, and we're actually in discussions right now with our colleagues in the IPLC world to actually revise and update these materials. So we're constantly seeking for ways to ensure the robust engagement of IPLCs in the marine work across the various streams of work that we do, and to also capacitate them to actually better live up and better implement and play a stronger role in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you. Joseph, as you know, inclusiveness is a key component on the future global biodiversity framework, and this has to be reflected, and the more information and elements to show this, the better. Next one, please.
Thank you, Chair. There's a question regarding the EBSA criteria themselves. The person is asking whether the criteria will be modified in the future.
Sure, happy to address this. We actually get this question from time to time, which is quite an interesting question. However, no, we don't expect, or we are not proposing or suggesting that the COP revise the EBSA criteria themselves. The reason for this being that the EBSA criteria are first very broad and very flexible and can be applied to a broad range of situations. In fact, we've gone through, as I said, we've had 15 regional EBSA workshops, and beyond that, we've worked with many other countries and organizations to apply the EBSA criteria within their communities, within their jurisdictions. And we have found, in fact, that the criteria does stand and does allow us to consider a wide range of information and all marine and coastal ecosystems. So we found that it has been, let's say, fit for purpose and allowed us to do what the EBSA process is intending to do. So no, there is no prospect. I mean, of course, the COP can do what it wishes, but there is no prospect for the EBSA criteria to be revised. And furthermore, frankly, maybe I can speak for myself, but I don't think it would be necessarily helpful at this stage to do so.
Thank you, Joseph. Next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. There's a question with regard to the zero draft of the post-2020 GBF and whether it will be discussed under this agenda item or exclusively under the agenda item on the GBF.
Secretary?
Sure. Well, as I noted, the post-2020 framework and how it will be addressed at SBSTTA will be under a different agenda item. There, you may notice that there is an entry, a paragraph in the suggested recommendations, basically requesting, which would, if the SBSTTA agrees, request the Secretariat to advance work on supporting the implementation of the post-2020 framework, but the actual discussions on the framework itself are proceeding, as I said, under a different agenda item, being addressed more directly, separate. And I think it would be pretty clear to all that keeping all of those discussions in one agenda item is much more productive and helpful. Of course, ocean issues are very important to the framework, but we don't wish to complicate and confuse the situation by addressing it under different agenda items. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Yeah, it's very important to have this clarity because we have one specific agenda item for discussion on post-2020. We have a very specific mandate to do scientific and technical analysis and to provide advice to the co-chairs on this matter. And we have many other agenda items for SBSTTA 24 responding to specific decisions from COP. And we open different fronts, it will be very complicated. So all discussions on this matter on the global biodiversity framework and in particular from the monitoring framework will be addressed in agenda item 3 that we discussed yesterday. All right, next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. There's a question with regard to living modified fish within EBSAs or how it would be connected to EBSAs or even within the broader marine and coastal biodiversity agenda.
Joseph?
Sure. Well, I believe this certainly seems to touch a bit more on the previous agenda items that are being addressed at SBSTTA. In fact, we are not dealing with the issue of modified organisms in any way under the marine items. Again, to ensure that issue is addressed more directly and coherently under a different topic. Just to, although we're in the same webinar here, it's not because necessarily we're linked together or connected in any way. But so the topic of modified organisms is not addressed under the marine item or the marine work, but rather and more appropriately under the other items that my colleagues are dealing with, as mentioned earlier in this webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much. What is important is to recognize that EBSAs has been a global-wide effort documenting all these important areas. Of course, I see this natural reaction to see threats on biodiversity in these areas, either by invasive species or living modified organisms, but we have particular activities in the convention addressing those topics. Of course, any additional information that can enrich what we have for every EBSAs will be very useful for decision making. Next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. There's a question with regard to the existence of any plans to integrate and bring the FAO's small-scale fisheries voluntary guidelines into the work of the Marine and Biodiversity Program of Work.
Good question.
Sure. Yes, thank you for this question. Indeed, we work very closely with our FAO colleagues, and we are very well aware of and very pleased that the small-scale fishery guidelines exist and are being implemented in various ways around the world. Now, we do actually, in our various activities, capacity building activities under the Sustainable Ocean Initiative, as well as our work directly on fisheries and biodiversity, we of course do consider small-scale fisheries issues. and in various cases have of course provided the small scale fisheries guidelines as a source as a reference material for our capacity building activities. Also of note here is our work that's going is the work that is the collaboration that's ongoing on the basis of the previous COP decision on OECMs, or other effective area-based conservation measures. And we're working, and given that the COP has adopted the criteria and definition of OECMs at the previous meeting and requested the Secretariat and FAO to support the identification of OECMs, we are in fact doing that, working with colleagues around the world, with FAO, with IUCN, and with many governments to support the identification and the management of OECMs. And of course, in many areas, these are from the small scale fisheries communities, small scale fishing communities. So I would say that although, again, there's necessarily nothing coming before SBSTA on the small scale fisheries guidelines, because they have been duly produced and are out there in existence. And we are working together with our FAO colleagues to support the implementation of these guidelines in various ways, as well as with other relevant policy and policy frameworks and goals and targets from other processes that exist that are also relevant to work under the CBD. So, although they're not mentioned, of course, it's an important part of the ocean world that we do also work on.
Thank you, Joseph. I'd like also to highlight, and I'm very pleased to see that FAO adopt its own biodiversity mainstreaming strategy into agricultural sectors, which includes agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. So all collaboration with FAO and CBD is very much welcome, and there are many activities and products like these guidelines that can be taken into consideration in the future work jointly on marine issues. Thank you very much. Next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. There's a question, a comment more than a question, with regard to marine ecosystems restoration and the fact that the zero draft asks for a percentage to be achieved by 2030. And the question and the comment is that it would be interesting to be able to discuss that that target.
Well, I believe the explanation was already made with all the efforts regarding global biodiversity framework. I think that should be the place to address this. Can we move to the next one, please?
Yep. There is a question with regard to marine genetic resources and the connection between that and EPSAs.
Sure, yes. Well, as I said before, EPSAs the EPSA process and the EPSA approach is used to describe a broad range of different types of systems that exist for their ecological and biological significance. This can include species or ecosystems that do have marine genetic resources, although I would caution, because the term marine genetic resources also implies a sort of a use aspect, and I would emphasize that EPSAs do not deal with use, threats, human use. It's simply focusing on the ecosystems that are there and why they're important, and they may be important because they have marine genetic resources, but nonetheless, it is something that, as I said, it is something that can be used for the justification as any other kind of significance for the ecosystems and biodiversity there. So it simply depends on how it's applied, where the criteria are used, and then what that can be used for once areas are identified as EPSAs.
Thank you very much. I see this natural reaction to see any threats to marine biodiversity through overexploitation, illegal harvesting of fisheries or invasive species or LMOs is part of the rationale, but we should be very clear that we are not dealing with the whole program on marine issues. We are responding at this SBSTA to specific requests from COP and in particular EPSAs and some other of the activities that Joseph already report. But thank you very much for this, and of course will be also part of the Global Biodiversity Framework discussions in Agenda Item 3. Next one, please.
Thank you, Chair. There is a question with regard to any plans for the revision of the marine program of work in light of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and when that would happen, if so?
Thank you for the question. I assume that before giving the floor to the Secretariat, we're doing our part. We're contributing with monitoring elements. We will see feedback from SBI, also the third meeting, and when COP adopt the new framework, then many issues will go back and a lot of adjustments at national level, and BSAPs, and of course the different program awards should take this in consideration for the new phase. That's my feeling, but it depends to many instances of substance bodies, of CBD bodies. But Joseph, you want to add something?
No, I think you captured it well, Chair. Yes, the issue of the program of work is of course we have many programs of work under the CBD, and this whatever sort of happens with these programs of work or how they are addressed going forward, should be done logically in a consistent way across the various programs of work. So we will take whatever guidance the subsidiary bodies and the COPs wish to provide on the program of work moving forward, and would be done ideally and in a consistent way with other programs of work as well. So I don't think there's any need necessarily to go into this in detail here on the marine program of work in particular.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. There's a question with regard to safeguards in relation to the use of marine spatial planning in order to protect the human rights of IPLCs, for an example. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, we're getting into very technical discussions here, which would be a very interesting topic for another dedicated webinar with our great ocean colleagues. But perhaps not the best time here to address this very important issue. Of course, there are numerous nuances and technical issues that are related to the effective use of marine spatial planning and its implications and its use in the context of achieving conservation and sustainable use, including safeguards for IPLCs. I guess there's not much to say on this, except yes, in principle, certainly we in principle, the use of safeguards for small-scale communities, small-scale fishing communities for IPLCs is important and is being used in various ways in marine spatial planning. I am happy to provide more information on the various sources of guidance and the syntheses of experience that exist within the CBD Secretariat that we've produced that may address these topics. And I would also point the participant to the information document that provides a synthesis of marine spatial planning experiences, which may have some more information specific cases of these kinds of safeguards that are being implemented by governments or relevant organizations.
Thank you very much. Certainly, this is a very complex issue, but very important one. This goes again to the issue of inclusiveness and participation of indigenous peoples and local communities in decision making, and spatial planning. Marine spatial planning is also part of this decision making process at national level. This is an implementation matter as well. I believe this also could be a matter of SBI discussions probably, and in general for the framework. Rather than in particular for substance, the technical matters, but the more joint participation of any biodiversity related matters and management decisions, the better for the future. We need to improve seriously on these matters, including human rights. Next one, please.
Thank you, Chair. There's a question with regard to illegal and unreported fisheries and harmful subsidies and where they are addressed.
Again, this is an aspect of the topic an aspect of the fisheries and biodiversity topic that does come into play in various areas of the work that we conduct. I would say that that, as I said, there are a number of different areas of collaborations that we have with FAO and with the fisheries community. I could point you to, and would be happy to point you to different activities and sources of information and resources that we've done under this Secretariat that address this issue. IUU is obviously a critical issue for achieving sustainable fisheries and biodiversity, and in fact, information on IUU was also really included and considered in the assessment of the achievement of Aichi Target 6. Actually, last year we published a technical series document on the assessment of Aichi Target 6, which actually provided a very robust assessment of how of both the types of information that were and can be used to assess Aichi Target 6, as well as the gaps in our knowledge and information that limit how we can robustly assess fisheries related targets at the global level, fisheries and biodiversity related targets at the global level, including for IUU issues. So certainly it's a very key part of the overarching discussion and work that we're doing on fisheries and biodiversity, and certainly will continue to be an important part of our collaboration and work on fisheries issues going forward.
Thank you very much. I just realized that unfortunately we're running out of time. I would like to thank you for this very dynamic session. I see a number of questions that were that we revised during today's session. This brings us to the end of today's webinar. Thank you all for participating today, and I hope you found the webinar informative and it will be helpful for your understanding on this agenda item in preparation for Substat 24. If participants wish to follow up on matters related to agenda items presented today, the Secretariat is available to answer questions and, if needed, consider additional webinars in the future. I hope that many of you also participate in the next webinar in February 2nd, next Tuesday, on other agenda items for Substat 24. I would also like to thank the Secretariat for preparing and organizing this session today, and our partners contributing to the process. It was very nice to see co-chairs of Artix also giving additional information, to see all the many activities that CBD is doing in order to help Substat to do its job and contributing to the project, to the process. Again, thank you all for joining us today. This webinar is now concluded. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.